This story is so unforgiving it leaves you breathless, set against the frozen silence of the Montana frontier, where survival was never guaranteed. It's a place where fate brings together two people who were never meant to meet, bound by desperation and grit. It all began with one letter written out of fear, small, quiet, but powerful enough to change the destiny of an entire ranch. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The Christmas he'd planned for was supposed to bring him a wife, quiet hands, a warm kitchen, something resembling hope. What Clay Ironwood hadn't planned for was the kind of skill that could drag a dying ranch back from the edge. It was 1889, and winter had seized Montana with a ruthless grip that unnerved even men who'd survived blizzards their whole lives. This wasn't a season passing through. It was a full-scale siege. Snow poured down in heavy, choking sheets, erasing fence lines, bending old pines under its weight, smothering the land in a silence so thick it pressed against the ears. December crept toward Christmas without mercy. There was no anticipation, no warmth, only the sharp fear of another hard freeze. Ironwood Ridge, once the pride of the valley with its strong barns and wide open pasture, now sagged beneath debt and ice. The ranch fought like a wounded animal, breath, shallow pulse fading with every new snowfall. Clay Ironwood stood on the porch of the main house, 36 years old, but worn down enough to pass for 50. The wind cut into his face, but he barely noticed. The cold inside him ran deeper. He was tall and broad through the shoulders, though hunger and worry had carved him lean. His eyes were the color of struck flint, hard, dulled by loss. He stared across the endless white, his breath hanging in the air like the remnants of a life he wished he could scrape clean. Walter Ironwood had died 2 winters back. Eleanor Ironwood followed the next spring. Since then, Clay had been alone, holding together a legacy that was quietly coming apart. Loneliness sat in his chest like a blade. It hurt more than frostbitten fingers ever could. That ache was what drove him 3 months earlier to swallow his pride and write to a marriage broker in San Francisco. Not for love, not for romance. He hadn't written for beauty or gossip-stopping charm. Clay wrote because he needed to survive. He requested a Chinese woman, having heard they were steady, hard-working, loyal, someone dependable. He pictured a gentle presence, someone to tend the fire patch, his shirt set a warm plate on the table. Maybe in time, someone to fill the empty rooms with life again. Someone grateful for shelter. Someone who would stand behind him when voices got loud. Skill never crossed his mind. Neither did fire. And yet that Tuesday afternoon, fire was exactly what stepped down from the stagecoach. Black Creek lay buried beneath 2 feet of fresh snow, the wooden boardwalk slick and dangerous. The horses snorted clouds of steam as the driver heaved a single battered leather trunk into the drift. The door creaked open. A woman descended, and the colorless frontier seemed to crack wide open. She wasn't wrapped in dull wool like the other women watching from doorways. Malin Hart stood tall, her heavy coat parting just enough as she adjusted her luggage to reveal a flash of red silk beneath traditional bold threaded with gold that caught the thin winter light. Against the blinding snow, it looked defiant, alive. A thick bonnet framed her face, but there was nothing timid about her expression. Her eyes were sharp, measuring dark with intelligence. She scanned the Black Creek settlers, the sagging buildings, the frozen street, and then her gaze locked onto Clay. He'd expected fear, shaking hands, hesitation. Instead, she walked straight toward him, boots crunching with purpose. "Clay Ironwood?" she asked. Her English carried an accent, but the words were clean, steady, unbothered by the wind clawing at them. "That's me." Clay answered his voice, rough from disuse. He suddenly felt painfully aware of the smell of smoke and horse on his coat, of how unprepared he was for this moment. She didn't lower her eyes. She didn't pause. She simply stood there, calm, unyielding, like someone who hadn't come to be saved, but to see what she was dealing with. He stood there unwashed, carrying the raw scent of horse sweat and wood smoke, while she looked like fine porcelain that had somehow learned how to go to war. "You must be Malin Hart," Clay said. "I am," she answered simply. She didn't curtsy. She didn't lower her eyes. She met his stare head-on, steady and unflinching. "Your letter said you had a wagon." Clay blinked, caught off guard. "I do. This way, then." He reached for her trunk, expecting something light silk's personal keepsakes, little more. Instead, his arm tightened under the weight the moment he lifted it. The thing was solid, heavy, as if it were packed with rock. He grunted and hauled it up onto his shoulder. Malin watched, not with thanks, but with a cool, assessing look, like she was taking measure of him. "What's in it?" Clay asked, as he shoved the trunk into the back of the wagon. "Books," she replied. "Books, essentials." When they climbed onto the bench, the Black Creek settlers stopped what they were doing. Shovels froze mid-swing. Curtains shifted behind frosted windows. In 1889, a white rancher bringing home a Chinese bride was enough to feed rumor for years. The whispers cut sharp through the cold air. "Brought her all this way," someone sneered. "Look at that red dress, like some kind of heathen." Another hissed. Clay's jaw tightened. He gathered the reins, ready to bark back when a gloved hand rested lightly on his arm. He looked at Malin. She wasn't watching them. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, calm, distant, almost bored by the noise behind her. "The wind's shifting," she said evenly. "We should move before the storm does." She didn't acknowledge the insults. She dismissed them entirely. Something twisted in Clay's chest. Not pity, but a quiet, unexpected respect. He snapped the reins. The horses surged forward, pulling them away from town and into the wide, empty white. The ride to Ironwood Ridge was long and punishing. The silence between them felt heavier than the wind. Clay tried to speak, tried to deliver the welcome he'd practiced, the expectations he'd rehearsed, but the words refused to come in the presence of her composed stillness. At last, Malin broke the quiet. "Your letter said the ranch was large," she said. "It didn't say it was thriving." Clay winced. "It was... once. Winters have been hard, markets worse, and you asked for a wife," she continued, stating it plainly. "I did. To cook, to clean, to share a life." Clay said, though he knew what he'd imagined. "A ranch needs a woman's touch." She turned toward him, eyes narrowing against the glare of snow. "A ranch needs more than a touch, Mr. Ironwood. It needs a backbone." She gestured toward a broken rail half buried in a drift as they turned onto the property. "And yours is cracked." Irritation flushed his face. "I didn't bring you here to inspect my fences." "No," she said calmly. "You brought me here to help. I can't help if I ignore the truth." When the house finally emerged, it looked worse up close. The roof sagged under snow, the chimney leaked a thin, weak thread of smoke, and the barn leaned left like a drunk struggling to stay upright. The corral held nothing but the two worn-out horses pulling the wagon. Malin climbed down before Clay could offer his hand. She didn't head for the house. She turned away from it and walked straight toward the barn. "Where are you going?" Clay called after her as he set the brake. "The house can wait." She answered, her voice steady against the wind. "The horses can't." "How many?" Clay asked, baffled. 14, he added after a beat. "There were 52 once. Winter took the rest." She nodded, not with pity, but with the cold precision of someone tallying losses. Then she vanished into the dark, yawning entrance of the barn, leaving Clay standing alone in the snow. He'd expected complaints, a rush for warmth, maybe anger at the cold. Instead, she was already with his stock. He followed her inside. The barn was dim and sour with moldy hay and manure. Loose boards rattled as the wind pushed through a sound that usually made the horses nervous. But inside, Clay saw Malin Hart moving calmly from stall to stall. She had taken off her heavy gloves. Her pale, slender hands slid along the flank of his prized stallion Black Ghost, a massive jet-black animal known for biting strangers. Yet the horse stood still, head lowered, as Malin murmured in a language Clay didn't recognize. The sound was low, melodic, soothing. "He has trouble in his hooves," she said without looking back. "Thrush, left hind," she paused, then added, "and he's underfed." Clay bristled. "I feed them what I can afford. Hay's scarce, 5 cents a bale." Malin turned to face him, the red silk beneath her coat catching the low light like a dying coal. "Then you're feeding them wrong," she said evenly. "You feed them like draft horses, not like runners." "Runners?" Clay scoffed. "These are work horses, marshland stock, built to pull and plow." She stepped closer. She was shorter than him, yet somehow she filled the space between them. "Is that what you think you have? It's what my father bred. Heavy bone, thick coats. Your father bred endurance," she corrected. "But look closer." She pointed toward an older mare in the corner. "See the neck, the chest. That one isn't pure marshland." Clay frowned. "She carries athletic blood," Malin continued. "Old blood, fast blood." Clay stared at her. What could a city woman possibly know about bloodlines? Her expression tightened. "My father was not a washerman." "Mr. Ironwood," she said sharply. "In China he ran the imperial stables. When war drove us out, we fled to California. There he managed racing studs for railroad magnates." She held his gaze. "I did not grow up with dolls. I grew up in the saddle. I know a diamond even when it's buried in mud." The words landed heavy in the cold air. Clay said nothing. He had sent for a cook. What arrived was a horse master. "Show me your books," she said quietly. "That's private," Clay snapped. She turned fully toward him. "A wife doesn't need them," she said. "A partner does." She cut him short. How much debt? Clay dropped his gaze, the answer heavy on his tongue. $15,000. The Frontier Bank takes the ranch in April if I miss the interest. Malin didn't react. She only nodded once. "Then we have until April to turn worn-out horses into money." The days that followed were shaped by ice and desperation, yet something stubborn took root between Clay Ironwood and Malin Hart. It wasn't the soft romance of novels. It was something harder. It was a bond built through work. Malin claimed the house first. The kitchen fell into quiet order, the chaos replaced by efficiency. Meals stayed simple, but the herbs she'd brought in her trunk transformed thin venison into something rich and warming. Still, the barn was where she belonged. She rose before dawn, braiding her long black hair tight, pulling on men's trousers she'd altered to fit her frame, and stepping into the dark before Clay was fully awake. He watched her from frost-clouded windows, equal parts awed and unsettled. She worked harder than any ranch hand he'd ever paid. Breeding charts appeared on the backs of overdue notices. Poultices brewed from dried roots were packed into cracked hooves. She groomed until dull coats shone again, coaxing life out of animals that had nearly been written off. One morning, as a blizzard swallowed the world in white, Clay found her inside the stall with Black Ghost. She was binding the stallion's legs with strips of old wool. "You'll freeze out here," Clay shouted over the roof's rattling boards. "He needs heat in the tendons," she replied calmly. "If we're going to sell him as a stud, he has to move like water, Not like an old plow horse. Clay grabbed a pitchfork and worked the stall beside her. Sell him. Nobody around here can afford a stud like that. They buy draft stock. We aren't selling to around here, Malin said, standing and wiping sweat from her brow. We're selling to what's coming. That night, beneath a flickering kerosene lamp, she spread her plan across the table. A rough map of the surrounding counties lay open. The snow's deep, she said, tapping the paper, but the men who own the mines and big spreads are restless. They have money. They want status. They want horses that can run, she continued. Horses that look like royalty. We breed the mares now. We sell futures on the foals. We take deposits. And we sell Black Ghost's service. No one pays for a foal that isn't born yet, Clay argued, rubbing his temples. It's madness. It's speculation, Malin corrected. And that's how the Valley Ranch barons stay rich. She met his eyes, fire catching in the lamplight. We convince them Ironwood Ridge holds a hidden bloodline, a royal one. You know land, Clay. I know pride. Clay studied her dark circles beneath her eyes, hands reddened and cracked from cold. She was fighting for the ranch like it was already hers. The realization humbled him. All right, he said quietly. We try. The campaign began the following week. Snow reached their knees as they hitched the strongest horses to the sleigh. Clay drove. Malin sat beside him, not in work clothes, but wrapped in furs over her red silk, composed and commanding. She looked less like a bride, and more like visiting royalty as they headed for the Double Bar Ranch, owned by a skeptic named Hank Vance. Hank Vance was a hard man, and he laughed outright when Clay explained they were selling breeding rights. You want me to pay for air? Vance leaned forward, spit dark with tobacco hitting the snow. Clay, you've gone soft in the head. He cut his eyes toward Malin Hart. And you're letting a woman run your outfit. Malin stepped past Clay without answering him. She didn't address Vance at all. She walked to his own horse, a patchy gelding tied to the rail, ran her hand along its neck and spoke quietly. This horse is lame in the shoulder. Vance's grin faltered. You push him too hard on the left lead. The laughter died. How in hell would you know that Vance demanded? Because I know horses, Malin said, her voice clear and steady. And I know the stallion at Ironwood Ridge can sire a foal that will outrun anything you own. A foal that'll make the Double Bar known in Denver and San Francisco. She gave a small, indifferent shrug. Or you can keep riding broken geldings. Vance stared at her. The silence stretched thin. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. I want first pick of the spring drop. They went from ranch to ranch after that. Each meeting followed the same pattern, mockery first, then doubt, then grudging curiosity, and finally awe. Malin's knowledge couldn't be dismissed. She spoke of bloodlines and breeding with a precision that stunned rough cattlemen. She sold them a vision-speed prestige horses built like kings. By the time they turned back toward Ironwood Ridge, Clay's coat pockets were thick with deposit slips and gold. But winter wasn't finished with them yet. 2 nights before Christmas, the temperature plunged to 30 below. The wind screamed through the valley like something alive. Near midnight, a sharp crack split the darkness. The barn. Clay gasped. They threw on their coats and ran into the storm. Snow had broken a main beam in the barn roof. It sagged, threatening to collapse and bury the horses beneath it. The animals screamed, panicked. We have to get them out, Clay shouted, grabbing a halter. No, Malin seized his arm. They'll freeze in an hour if we turn them loose. The beam's too heavy. We lift it, she snapped. Use the wagon jacks. Get them now. For 3 brutal hours they fought the barn. Clay cranked the iron jacks until his muscles burned, while Malin slammed timber braces into place. She climbed into the rafters as the wood groaned and splintered, risking her life to guide every inch of the lift. she gave orders. Clay followed them without question. He was the strength. She was the mind. At last the beams settled. The groaning stopped. The roof held. They collapsed into the hay, breathing hard snow and sawdust clinging to their coats. The horses slowly calmed, their warm breath fogging the air. Clay turned and looked at Malin. Her face was streaked with grime hair, loose, and tangled blood seeping from splinters in her palms. To Clay, Ironwood, she had never looked more striking. "You saved them," he said quietly, the words catching in his throat. "We saved them," Malin Hart corrected, still breathing hard. Clay reached for her hand. It was rough, scarred, hardened by work, no different from his own. "I sent for a wife," he admitted, emotion shaking his voice. "I thought I needed someone to cook to keep the house warm." "I was wrong." Malin studied him, her dark eyes softening. "What do you need now, Clay, a partner?" he said without hesitation. "A general." He swallowed. "I don't think I can hold this place together by myself." "You're not by yourself," she whispered. "You have the Ghostwind bloodline now." Then more quietly, "And you have me." Christmas Eve broke clear and still. The storm had spent itself. The land lay frozen and bright, every field and fence glittering like cut glass. Clay laughed, the sound unfamiliar in a house that had known too much silence. He stood and held out his hand. "Merry Christmas, Malin." She took it, her grip firm and certain. "Merry Christmas, Clay." They stood together by the window, moonlight spilling across the snowbound land. In that moment, Clay understood that debt was only numbers, winter only a season. The real wealth of Ironwood Ridge stood beside him. He had expected a wife to stand behind him. Fate had delivered a woman meant to stand beside him and lead. And as the wind moved through the pines like a low, steady song, Clay Ironwood knew the ranch would do more than endure. It would become a legend. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso Legal, Barra Disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.